Hey, good morning. It's Jeannie Yandel in for Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. So much cool wildlife here in Washington. We've got cougars, deer, those little marmosets in the Olympics, and, for the first time in decades, grizzly bears. In a minute, we'll talk to Chris Morgan, host of the Wild podcast, about how to stay safe when you run into animals in the wild, or in your own neighborhood. But first, let's get you caught up. Seattle Police Chief Diaz says the city has a public safety crisis after gunfire broke out across the city early Sunday. SPD says 8 people were shot in 4 unrelated incidents in Pioneer Square, Belltown, Chinatown ID, and Capitol Hill. 3 of those people died. Just last week, Mayor Durkan announced more than $10 million for community groups working to stop gun violence. If mask limbo has made you feel unsure or uneasy about what to do when, here's some clarity. The state's top doctor is once again recommending we all mask up when we're inside in public spaces, regardless of our vaccination status. Dr. Scott Lindquist said Friday the Delta variant is driving a 5th wave of cases and hospitalizations, mostly among unvaccinated people. Lindquist said new cases more than tripled in the span of about a week. King County's top health official is also urging everyone to wear masks indoors, but so far, these are recommendations, not requirements. And Sue Bird and the U.S. women's basketball team get started at the Olympics tonight. But Bird tells the Seattle Times it's going to be her last. Can't blame her. She's played in 4 Olympics and won gold every time. Team USA is going for 7 golds in a row in Tokyo. Tip-off against Nigeria is 9:40 p.m. Seattle time. If you've tried to get a camping reservation for the summer or gone out hiking, you already know this. Nature in the Pacific Northwest is bursting with humans right now. And it's not like nature was empty before we made summer plans. In Washington state, wildlife is abundant and diverse, and on occasion, it can be dangerous. Chris Morgan knows this better than most. He's an ecologist, a bear expert, and the host of the Wild podcast here at KUOW. And he's here to talk with us about how to act and how not to act when we encounter wildlife. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jeannie. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And since you are a bear expert, I have to ask you about the latest bear news first. So, biologists recently found a healthy female grizzly bear with 3 cubs in Washington state near the Idaho border. They were able to put a radio collar on her to keep track of her. And I read that this was the first time this has happened in 40 years. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, the 40 years has been the recovery period for these grizzly bears in Washington state and elsewhere. So first time since that recovery started, since these animals were put on the endangered species list in the 70s, that a female has been caught. And not just a female, but like you said, it's a female with 3 cubs, 3 yearlings, meaning they're just over a year, about a year and a half old at this point. So, and those are the most important individuals in a population because those are the ones that ensure the longevity of a population. They're giving birth to the cubs and caring for the cubs for sometimes 4 years. Mm-hmm. So she's a very precious little jewel.
It's really great to hear this notion that this female grizzly is an indicator of overall ecological health, that it's something that we can all feel really hopeful about and proud of. It just doesn't feel like I hear about that very often when it comes to the environment or the climate. Of course, not every interaction between humans and bears is as successful. What do you think we should keep in mind when it comes to encounters with grizzly bears, or with black bears for that matter?
Yeah, I think mostly to remember that these bears are just making their way through life and trying to lead an honest, honorable life as a bear, right? And that all means acquiring food. It all means looking after your young. A lot of people can relate to raising 3 kids like she's doing in the Selkirks. And just imagine the pressure as a bear when you've got to find food every day to feed not just yourself, but 3 hungry mouths. And these bears eat a lot, you know. So I think looking at things from their perspective and understanding that is a really key starting point. A couple of other tips is make noise, don't go silently through the woods, especially in grizzly bear country. Don't hike alone at dawn and dusk is always a good idea, to have a hiking partner or someone at camp with you. And then make sure you cache your food. Countless examples of bear encounters with people are when a bear is trying to access human food because they can't resist the smell of our fatty food that they're craving, So make it unavailable. Cache your food 15 feet off the ground. Put it in a dry bag. Carry a carabiner and a rope or a parachute cord to do this and become good at it. And again, it's like one of those, it's like a survival skill, It's awesome to get into. And then keep your distance. Always important to keep your distance. There was that woman in Yellowstone that was, I think she's in the process of being fined for the behavior, but she'd stepped out of her car to the side of the road. There was a female with cubs, grizzly bears there, and she wanted to get a photograph with her phone. And as she pulled the phone out, the grizzly charged towards her. And, it was a very real charge and probably got that woman's heart pounding, but she was too close to that grizzly. They have a personal buffer space that you need to respect. And then back to understanding them, anyone would behave that way if they thought their kids were at risk, right? That's what that bear was thinking. This woman poses a risk to my kids. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to react. That woman was lucky in that case. It was a real, very, very real charge, but we call them bluff charges because it didn't actually end up in an attack. But keeping your distance and being mindful of how these guys operate is really, really important.
Okay, well, I have to ask, though. I mean, you go out and look for bears on purpose. And so I'm wondering...
You make that sound crazy.
I'm not trying to make it sound crazy, but if we're talking about boundaries here, what have you learned about bears and boundaries when you're out doing your work?
Yeah, so I've done everything from field research and capturing bears like they did in the Selkirks with this female to films about them and, of course, the podcast. And so I was trapping grizzly bears over 2 years in the mid-90s in the Canadian Rockies. And I came out of the trap location, and it had been a long day, and there were 4 or 5 of us hiking out. Beautiful mountainous scene. And I just thought, I'm going to get ahead of everyone, get some headspace. So I hiked 100, 200 yards ahead of everybody else. And as I did, over the rise came a female with 3 grizzly bear cubs, these yearlings. So I came off the trail, scurried up this scree slope, and almost broke my ankle in the process, trying to get up there, but quietly, and put my hands out, talked to the bear. Hey, bear, it's okay. I'm here. I don't want to surprise you. Let's have this understanding. I know you just want to kind of get by, hopefully. So I came off the trail, just 20 yards off the trail, and she walked by, and she was very calm. But her 3 cubs were going crazy, up on her back with their front paws and looking at me and trying to figure out what was going on. And they just cruised on by, and it was one of those amazing experiences that showed me, these bears just want to get through their day. They just want to survive. They don't want trouble with human beings. And there was an example of a completely harmless interaction that will never make news headlines, right? You never hear those stories. But there are thousands of encounters like that every summer with bears that are just an absolute pleasure. It's something to keep in mind.
Okay, so I have a little confession to make here. I am not going to make it to the backcountry this summer. I'm not going to go camping. I'm probably not going to go hiking. What I am doing, though, is going for walks in my neighborhood. And I have not encountered any bears, but I have encountered raccoons, some bunnies, a possum, a couple of rats. My Facebook neighborhood group is kind of blowing up right now with these blurry photos of a coyote that they've seen. So I'm wondering, what should I be keeping in mind with these encounters with urban wildlife?
I think the wonder and joy of it first. Enjoy it, and keep your kids close at hand. Even in some of these urban areas, these suburban areas especially, we can have cougars there. So even bigger than a coyote. And so just being aware of all these creatures and making it a learning experience for your children, especially, I think is a really good thing for those people who have kids. And just enjoying us living, when we live in the Pacific Northwest, we're lucky enough to have parks and places even in or near towns that have creatures in them. So I was going to joke and say, whatever you do, don't stare the raccoon in the eye, because that can lead to trouble. But, really, there aren't too many concerns when it comes to those urban species. And it's something to take joy in, even if you can't get into the backcountry like many people can't, or perhaps never will, sitting out and listening to the birds and watching a coyote if you're lucky enough to see one in town. Raccoons, they're incredible creatures. And I always feel like the more you learn about them, the more you want to know about them, the more you want to help them, the more we all want to protect these wild places that everything from a raccoon to a grizzly bear needs. You know?
It also feels like personal space still applies in those situations.
Definitely. Yes, yeah. Don't be approaching wild animals, and don't be, raccoons have latrine piles, so they use a regular toilet. And, those latrine piles that raccoons create are not good for kids to be around, things like that. So just learning more, and there's tons of information online about all of this that people can be aware of. So, yeah, enjoying it from a safe distance like you would a grizzly.
Yeah. I have to say, I am a mostly in-city person, and which kind of makes it easy for me to forget that wild animals are always around me. And I wonder what kinds of misperceptions you think people like me might have when it comes to living in close proximity to wild animals. Like, what don't we understand about this?
Well, I think one important thing is that, perhaps to start looking at ourselves as a species as part of nature, not apart from nature. I love that line. I wish it was mine, but it was my hero, Sir David Attenborough, that said that. We are a part of nature, not apart from nature. So if you start there, your whole relationship with these creatures changes and makes you more open-minded to being a part of an ecosystem that we're the ones that are affecting it, right? These creatures are just trying to make their way around us, so they can't be blamed for one thing or another, however they behave. We're the smart ones to work around them.
Chris Morgan is an ecologist, a bear expert, and host of KUOW's The Wild podcast. And, by the way, there is a whole episode of The Wild that is all about how to stay safe in nature. And you can find a link to that episode in our show notes. Chris, thank you so much for talking with me. I really enjoyed it.
Jeannie, I enjoyed it too. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening today. Matt Martin produced today's show. Our production team is Caroline Chamberlain-Gomez, Clare McGrane, Diana Opong, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Jeannie Yandel. Trish is back tomorrow. Have a great Monday.